to continue the story, our wind-up banquet was going to be held at the Castle of Chillon, which was made famous by Lord Byron when he wrote a poem, a long poem called The Prisoner of Chillon. Well, one of our members of the Northeast area from Boston, Massachusetts, was a part-time actor. And so we had arranged with him, we thought, to, when we got to the castle, that he would recite the poem, The Prisoner of Chillon, and dress up and do it from a balcony and everything. Again, like most things, the guy shows up and on 2 days' notice says that it's too difficult and he is not going to do it. So Darcy and I first tried to convince Darcy that he should do it, but he said he couldn't do it. So I said, okay, I'll try it. So Darcy and I drove up to the castle. It's built on a lake, on Lake Geneva. And we were going to go that night to our wind-up banquet on boats, 2 boats. But you could drive there, so Darcy and I drove up because we wanted to see whether you could hear and so forth. So I go up and I'm standing on the balcony and Darcy's down in the courtyard, and this is just on a regular afternoon where people are touring around. So I suddenly start doing the Prisoner of Chillon, and it starts off, his hair is white, but not with fear, though turned it white in a single year, and so forth. And I'm really shouting it out because I want people to be able to hear it all throughout the courtyard. And Darcy's down there to see whether you can hear. So Darcy's standing there, and all of a sudden, all these other tourists start appearing from all over everywhere. And I'm up there, and I didn't see them, but Darcy did. And he's trying to wave to me to slow down or stop or something, that all these people there, and I'm up shouting through the poem, and all these people are peering up. And Darcy said that they didn't know where it was coming from. Then when they found out, they thought that we were a couple of nuts. And one guy had gone crazy or something, was up in the balcony shouting out this poem. So anyway, but it went off real well tonight. And then I lost my voice because I kept practicing. And so I went down and found a place in Lausanne that had theatrical supplies, and they sent me to a druggist who had it sprayed, like when someone was there for the opera or something and their voices started going on them, that you'd spray your throat. So I got through it. It wasn't as good as it would have been had I had a full voice, but it did come off well, and everybody, and Darcy said the funniest thing that was said, the 2 people, I was all dressed up with a big long beard and long hair and in rags and chains and this, and 2 guys were standing there, and he heard them talking to each other, and one said to the other one, who do you think that is? And then the other guy came in, oh, I imagine it's that McConvey guy. He's the only one that's nuts enough to do this. And Darcy said he really flipped out when that happened. Anyhow, from after the conference was over, we had planned a group of us had planned a trip to Russia because Russia, Khrushchev was the premier or the secretary or whatever his job was, and Bill Pollock, who was in the travel business, put together this tour. And being all young presidents and everything, there was a certain amount of clout. So they were going to, they had arranged a lot of visits with local Russian businessmen. And we got the VIP treatment of going through Lenin's tomb and going to factories. And we went to a school. Anyhow, when we were there, we were out, the men were out at a automobile factory about the 3rd day, and the wives had gone to a rehearsal of a ballet or something like that, and they all of a sudden they came into the factory and to the rehearsal hall and put us back on buses and said we were to go to the U.S. Embassy. So we went down to the U.S. Embassy, and they took us down into what they called the safe room, which was supposed to not have any bugs in it or anything like that. And the ambassador to Russia, Boy Kaler was his name, and his number one aide, a man named Funkhauser, they sat us down and said, we don't want you to be unduly alarmed, but this cable, the cables have been closed down for 12 hours to the United States, and this cable just came in. They opened it up just long enough to send this cable and then closed them again. And the cable was President Kennedy's address to the nation about the missiles in Cuba and that they had put up a blockade, and if they didn't turn back, that it possibly meant war and all of this. So naturally, we were all disturbed, but they told us that from their readings of everything that they didn't really think it was going to happen, but you can't think of a much worse place to be if there was going to be a war between the United States and Russia than to be in Russia. But so we asked them that that night there was supposed to be a cocktail party or cocktail reception that the embassy was putting on for us, and to which they had invited all of these Russian businessmen. Like the head, they took all our business, like they were inviting what they call the head of propaganda, because I was going to be there, an advertising man. There was somebody else that was in the textile business, so they had the head of the clothing industry and this sort of thing. So they told us, well, no, they wanted to go ahead with it, that they didn't figure because of this that any of the Russians would show up. But to come on ahead, and they had everything laid on. Well, we went to the party that night, and every one of the Russians, with their interpreters and everything, showed up, and we just had a grand time. Now here, this is right at the time that is the ship going to turn back with the missiles, and is the ship not going to turn back? So then the next day, we were going to go to the University of Moscow, which was the hotbed for the revolutionists. There were Cubans that went to school there, the Africans that were from Angola and places like that, plus all of the things. And we toured around the university and went into their classrooms, saw where they lived and everything. And as we were coming out, Funkhauser, one of the Paul Sonnabend, who was the president of Hotel Corporation of America, who had not come on the trip. His wife was not feeling well, so he stayed back from this trip to the university, got out of a taxi and came to Deanne and I and said, I've just come from the hotel. Mr. Funkhauser, who was this number 2 man at the embassy, has an important message for you. Well, naturally, that scares you to death, just the fact that anybody's gotten a message. So I get back to the hotel, and one of our guides, who were with us all the time, who are usually the guides there, are also members of the KGB, because they're really keeping, at that time, we're really keeping an eye on any American nationals. So, no, we were the only Canadians. But we were still both on American passports. They were all the rest of the group were Americans. We were the only people from Canada. But the McConbeys didn't go on to Russia. This was another trip that we went to East Germany and everything. We were all Americans on this trip. And except I think Ted Buell and his wife had come, and they were Canadian. So we got back to the hotel, and our guide arranged for me to speak to Mr. Funkhauser, and we got through to him, and he said, this cable has just come through from the, and this is the only cable that's come through all day since the last one of President Kennedy's address, and it's from a representative from Missouri. I think it was, maybe it was from Symington, the senator from Missouri, and it said to Mr. and Mrs. Joe Wren, 2 children seriously ill, come home immediately, signed by this senator. And naturally, Deanne, we think, well, they're just saying seriously ill. Something has to have really, maybe they were killed in an accident or something like that. So we tell this to the guide, and I said, I guess there's no way. Aunt Billy was staying with the children, and there's no way we could call through, but I've got to find out. And also we started making arrangements, because when you go into Russia, it says right on your passport when you're going to leave, what flight, what time, what day, so forth and so on. And you can't change it unless it's changed by the officials there in Russia, in Moscow. So she started that working, and I said, is there any chance at all, I know that all this trouble's going on, is there any chance at all that we can make a long distance call to my mother, who is staying with the children in Toronto? And I've never known whether maybe it's the fact that it was going to Canada that they let us do this. But about 20 minutes later, the phone rings, and they said, hold on for a call to Canada. But Deanne couldn't stand it. She left the room and went out in the hall of my hotel room. We were packing to catch, because they had gotten us on a plane at 5 o'clock that evening and going to hook up with a British Airways plane to Toronto out of London. They were getting us on a plane to London. So I get on the phone, and Aunt Billy, and I say, Aunt Billy, and she says, oh, Joe, why are you calling? I said, well, which 2 children are so seriously ill? And he said, well, there's nothing wrong. Jody has a little cold. And I said, but we've got this cable. She said, oh, that's that Jake. He's just been going crazy ever since this thing started over at his little girl and her husband are over, and he must have called me 15 times in the last 2 days. And so, of course, he had more reason than most, because down in Miami, well, there were planes going over and troop convoys going through town, going down that they might have to invade Cuba. But anyhow, now after I talked to her and she says everything's fine, everything's doing great, and I say to myself, well, they had to be listening into this conversation. So now they think we're spies, probably, and I don't know what to do. So I go to, so I run out in the hall to get Deanne to tell her that everything's fine, and she's all in tears and so forth. But it was such a relief, and to me too. But we didn't know what to do. Do we stay? Do we go? Do we, what do we tell the guide? Because we know, or at least I feel 100% sure that people had to be listening to my conversation, and they know it's all a sham now, what we've done. So I go down to the guide. I finally decide, well, the best thing to do is say, well, they were in an accident and there's some broken legs and so forth, so we better go on home. We decided we better go. Well, actually, Deanne made me. I would have stayed after I found out it was okay, but Deanne made me because she said if her father had gone to all that trouble and was that scared and that worried that we should go on and leave. So anyhow, we tell this and we tell all the other people, but we told a couple of people that it turned out what it really was, but whispered it over in the corner. So we go out now to go get our passports that will have the new time that we can leave stamped in it. And so up pulls one of these great big black limousines that you always see in the movies at the KGB, and it's flying a red flag, you know. And our guide, we get in the back seat, and she says, oh, well, I'll meet you over at the place. I have to do a couple of things. And then I really got scared. Then, because here was the guy driving the car had on a military uniform, and now our guide is leaving us, and there's another person up there in the front seat with him. And so we start out, and I don't know what to do. And I'm sitting there in the back of the car, and I kind of whispered at the end, do you think we ought to jump out if it stops at a red light? And we decide no, because we can't speak to anybody. There's nothing we can do. And anyhow, we pull up to this dark building, and they say, you get your passports in there. And I said, oh, this is probably the place they're going to put us in the cells and so forth. And who's the first person I see when they open the door? It's our guide. And she's the prettiest thing I'd ever seen in my life. All I would do was fold my arms around her and kiss her because I was so thankful. So we get back. She has our passports already, and now even I'm still a little bit. But this is because we get back in the car. She tells us goodbye and hopes everything with our children's going to be all right. And I'm saying she knows that it's a phony. And instead, we drive on out to the airport. And I found out that it's not, nothing's wrong at home. And they've told us that nothing is going, so far, nothing really bad. So we get on the airplane, on the British Airways plane, and there are only 5 other passengers. And that's a great big Comet jet. And I said, could I see a paper? She said, we're not allowed to give you, the stewardess is not allowed to give you a paper until we get off the ground. I guess it's off the ground. So we taxi down, take off, and I can hardly wait to get a paper. And I got a paper, and I got scared to death. The stories that were in there about the ship turning back, were they going to use the atomic bomb, the weapons, the missiles, and all of this sort of stuff. And so I wrote up, I sat there and I got to thinking about it, that if we're there, we're not harassed in any way, there's no demonstrations at the U.S. Embassy. Well, that's the other thing they told us coming to the cocktail party. He said, we want you to come in unless there's a big demonstration on. Then we're going to have the buses turn around and take you back to your hotel. There's nobody there demonstrating. All the Russian businessmen show up. We go out the next day to the University of Moscow, where if there ever should be demonstrations there. So you really saw 2 things. Number one, I'll go to my grave believing that Kennedy was all a sham to get him out of his problems over the Bay of Pigs. He always knew they were going to turn back, but he just made it all seem that way. So from a public relations standpoint, so he would turn out to be the big hero that stood up to the Russians and made them turn back, and this sort of thing. And I don't know what, there might have been a trade-off between he and Khrushchev, that if Khrushchev will go along with this deal, I'll go along with some other deal. And the other thing was to see a complete country of hundreds of millions of people that with a controlled press that not one person there knew. I had Kennedy's speech. They gave us a copy of Kennedy's speech that had come across the cable. I handed it to this real nice guide, one of our 3 guides we had, one of our guides that I liked the best. And she read the first 2 sentences and handed it back. She said, this is something I shouldn't read. yet she was well educated, spoke beautiful English and everything. So I had a first-hand knowledge, and it really was chilling, of a completely controlled press, television, radio, newspapers, everything, that you can tell the people anything, and they've got to believe it. Anyhow, we then flew on back to London. The guy comes running up the stairs, and in between I decided, because from Moscow, half of us were going on to Vienna and another half were going somewhere else. And our group was going to Vienna. So I'd already decided, Deanna and I had decided, well, you know, and also it came over the radio on the plane that the Russian boat had turned back. So Deanna and I said, well, there's no sense in us going all the way back. We've got a free ticket back. We're going to have to pay for this ticket. We didn't have to pay for the from Moscow to London, because that was, we could use our other ticket on that. But we would have had to pay from London, because we were on one of those charter. We were on the charter, so we had to get we were going to end up back in. So all we'd have to pay for was to fly from London to Vienna, and it would be, and we'd be back with the rest of the trip, and then fly on back on the charter. So this guy comes running up, and it's the British. They've been holding the British Airways plane for an hour for us to get back to our poor little children that were so seriously ill. And now I got to say, well, we've talked to them, and it's not as bad as it originally was thought and everything. So, no, I didn't want to tell anybody the truth, except that we would have to spend the night in London and then fly to Vienna the next morning or noon. So I'd written all this thing about the people coming to the reception, and that I thought it was just a put-up job. So, because I thought that the people over here should know that at least that all these people that were running around Moscow as if nothing was happening, while everyone over here is scared to death that the war is going to happen, and we're all running around in Moscow and convinced that nothing's going to happen. So I had written it all up, so I called being 5 hours ahead. I knew the Globe and Mail hadn't gone to press yet, so I called Toronto, and I was going to give this story. The night editor wasn't even interested. And so again, I think I saw another example of to a certain extent, a controlled press, that they were supposed to be keep the people whipped up about it and not admit that they had been using scare stories and all this, or had been hoodwinked by this guy. Yeah, that's right. But not certainly to the same extent. And anyway, I mean, there's no doubt they do, Jody, but still, it was scary how nothing was coming out to these people over in Russia. It was scary to see how a controlled press can so totally control the people. The rest of the trip was very nice. We really enjoyed Vienna. We went to the Vienna Opera. We stayed in a beautiful hotel. We did meet up with the McCondies there, and Darcy had rented one night the big suite where Adolf Hitler used to take Eva Braun when he used to go to Vienna, and we had a big dinner party up there, and we all got our picture taken in the bed where Eva and Adolf used to be. And, you know, it's a sort of a kick thing you have a once-in-a-lifetime shot at doing. We then came back to North America, having had our first trip to Europe, and it was, like so many of our trips, just fantastic. And YPO, I guess, other than my business and my family, did more to broaden me, to make our lifestyle so much better. We made a lot of friends in Toronto that we probably wouldn't have made had we not been members of the Young Presidents Organization. And it just was just a super experience. We would have universities. We had universities that we went to in Miami and Hawaii, in Monte Carlo, in Tokyo, Osaka, and the kind of resources, the people that when we went to a conference in Washington, we had the Secretary of State, we had the Secretary of the Interior that spoke to us, we had Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, speak to us, and just it opened so many doors that would not have been opened to me or to us over the years, that it just was an experience that you couldn't have paid for it. One of the trips on its own that you got would have cost you as much as, and you couldn't have gotten in. It cost you as much as 10 other trips, or less than 10 other trips. So that was always a great experience.